But rather than have me say much more now, we kind of ended up with this opening session that will really be, in a sense, an introductory discussion. And in order to do that, Andrew Keene is going to join me on stage. So Andrew, please come on. Thank you. Andrew is an author, pundit, media expert. He's currently about to publish his 5th book. I'll read their titles in reverse order. His most recent book was called How to Fix the Future. Then he wrote a book prior to that called The Internet is Not the Answer. And then his first one, right around the time when he and I first became acquainted, was called Digital Vertigo. You can see there's a little theme there. First book was called Cult of the Amateur, a little more neutral feeling. And he has a book coming out in the beginning of next year called Tomorrows versus Yesterdays.
Which you're included in.
Well, yeah, that's sort of related to why we're up here together. Why don't you explain what we're doing here, Andrew?
So I'm actually interviewing David, so because I didn't have very much to say, but David does. So
it was his idea, but I
said to him, you know, these events, which are always excellent, David's always the one asking the questions, but also someone should be asking him some interesting questions. So, we're going to spend the next few minutes asking David some hard questions, or as hard as I can think of. And he said to me before that I have license to behave as badly as I
didn't call it badly. I said, be your typical acerbic British intellectual self.
So that's official then. So, so I can be as badly behaved as I want. So let's start off, David, then with an easy question. Is the divorce, at least between you and techonomy and the tech community, is it official? Are you officially out of love with tech? No, should we rename techonomy anti-techonomy?
We're absolutely not divorced from tech, not in any way whatsoever. We love tech. We are still believers that technology is a tool to advance society. But I think we are reflecting the zeitgeist in our program when we have so many elements that will touch on what has gone wrong and what needs to be done differently. Unfortunately, the answers are very hard to find because the scale of the challenge is so vast and the pace at which society is going through tumultuous and often negative changes is so rapid. But we still love tech, and I still actually, believe it or not, and this will probably come up in our discussion, I still think Facebook has a lot of positives to offer the world. And I think
well, you almost sound surprised to say that.
Pardon me?
I mean, why is that news?
Well, it's news.
Why are you saying that?
Well, if you don't think it's surprising, I'm happy to consider it, you know, nondescript. It's because,
but the fact
obviously, because it's so easy to pile onto them, and everybody's piling onto them, right, including me. I mean, a year ago, was it a year ago that we gave that magazine out that had the article about Myanmar, and it was called Facing Facebook's Failure, and I enumerated a disturbingly long list of things that have gone wrong in countries all over the world because of Facebook's failures of governance. So clearly, we're in a weird moment. Things are going wrong, but we also, there's many things about digital culture and a digital society that are indispensable and necessary if we're going to keep coping.
So reset and restore. What are we resetting? Or what do you want to reset?
Well, the idea is Silicon Valley, the American tech industry, technology generally on a global scale has proceeded a little too blithely, I'd say, or too heedlessly. And that's not just our view. We need to re-inject more humanity into the process of innovation, entrepreneurship, technology development, and it needs to be a core part of every company's DNA from the beginning as much as possible. And the companies that fail in that regard are going to fail, certainly society, and in many cases fail themselves. So that's what we mean by that.
And when you include the word restore in the title of this event, are you suggesting that humanity was once there, that we're going back to some idyllic moment in the history of tech where people really cared?
Thank you for that very thoughtful comment. But no, actually, it's really just a clever phrase that we came up with because it had a kind of computer computer reference to it, and if you look in the first page of the magazine where, it's like something that's working on your screen. Restore something better. I mean, no, I don't think it was ever tremendously better than it is today. I think we can't even compare today to the past because the landscape is so fundamentally different. No, do I think the technology industry had a more benign influence on society when it was just, Intel building processors and Microsoft building operating systems and, IBM doing enterprise computing? No. That was a great, yes, I think that was probably a fine time. You can't have talked about it in the same way in those days. It was also vastly smaller in its impact on all of our lives at that time. So I don't think it really is relevant to think about the past, and I don't think we're coming back to some imagined blissful future past. I think we're trying to build something out of tools that are new that has never existed.
So what can't be fixed by tech? What are the issues that you think technology is irrelevant for?
Well, there's a lot, even on this stage last year, Paul Doherty from Accenture and others were talking about this whole idea of man plus machine, human plus machine, people plus machine, woman plus machine. This is the world we have to go toward. People have a sensibility that is never going to be replicated by AI or any smart machine. Empathy, compassion, love, concern for others. Computers are not going to have that. They're not going to have that in any fundamental way that we would recognize. They might turn out to be more benign than many of them seem to be today, but humanity is a unique quality that computing doesn't, really replicate, and that's a pretty basic statement.
I mean, perhaps algorithms can't be good, but they can't be evil either. Is that fair?
Yeah, sure.
So,
I think they can be wrong, they can be poorly coded, they can be poorly tested and based on incorrect information, but no, they're not evil. Technology is neutral, it's just a matter of how it's used. Unfortunately, it's used in many instances today in ways that are harmful.
Very briefly, David, you and I did this great conversation about Facebook in which I asked you what the problem was, and maybe you can deny it if I get it wrong, but basically you said the problem was greed, that the people running Facebook, two people in particular, were sort of consummated or intoxicated with greed. Is that really the problem with Silicon Valley, that people are just
I'm not sure I use the word greed so much as wealth, but
it's the same thing.
I think,
it's
close.
An appetite for money. Right?
And look, Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg are astonishingly wealthy, but Wall Street is goading them at every moment to stay on track, to keep building wealth, to keep building market cap. And it's very hard to extract these companies that have gone on a kind of, that built some momentum doing a set of activities that we can so easily identify as harmful, but that the investment community is just like totally dependent on their continued success. I mean, and I was even debating someone who may be in the room now just yesterday who was strongly arguing that basically algorithmic advertising has to be banned, et cetera. And you'll hear that argument on the stage. Or then similar argument, break them up, the Elizabeth Warren argument. But that is going to be very hard when the pension funds, the retirement savings of so many millions of people are involved. This is where it gets really gnarly. It's not like Facebook's just a $500 billion company in an abstract sense. That is the wealth of people. And it's very challenging to figure out how do you reset that structure and not harm a lot of innocent bystanders. And maybe in this case, we will harm a lot of innocent bystanders, and that may be the cost in order to remedy some of these disastrous social consequences that are impairing democracy, et cetera. I mean, one of your projects is how to save democracy.
Right.
That's one of your themes.
Before we get to the fix, I asked you the question about Facebook, and you said, well, they're being goaded by Wall Street. But what I don't understand is people who are worth several $1 billion, who couldn't spend it even if they wanted to in 100 years, why are they so obsessed with more money? Well, why do they care?
I'm not sure that they're obsessed with more money exactly, but I think
explain. I mean,
it's the ethos of growth. The ethos of growth, the necessity to grow once you go public, is inexorable. There is really no escaping from it. If you don't grow, you're punished. And then you combine that with the compensation methodology that these companies have become dependent on, where they give their employees stock options, and one of the reasons they stay is in hopes that their options will grow in value, which means the stock has to go up. These things all get intertwined in such a way that is, in the case of certain companies, extremely toxic.
But why do these? I still don't understand why these people care. They have nothing to lose.
No,
Yeah,
but
let me just. They created an IPO market where they changed the rules for everything. Why can't they change the rules on this?
Tristan Harris, who's going to be here on stage tomorrow,
who's very good,
often says he thinks it's possible. Or I guess Roger McNamee, who was on this stage last year, who's very close to Tristan, they say things like, Mark Zuckerberg could wake up one morning. This is actually a Roger point, I think. Could wake up one morning and say, you know what, I've got to do it differently. That could happen. I don't think it's highly likely, unfortunately. And I think the key thing, if you're looking at Zuckerberg in particular, that it makes it so complicated, is that he really is a true believer in the social positive impact of his product. And he really does think the world is being made better, and that we're essentially focusing on relatively inconsequential minor side effects of a much bigger story that is not understood by most of us. And that's his core belief, I think. And so he thinks we're essentially mistaken to focus on the decline of democracy, the rise of autocrats, the failure to rein in hate speech, et cetera, et cetera. And much as he agrees that he would like to see those things not be happening, he doesn't think they're nearly as important as we do.
So we've got 9 minutes left. We've got three questions, 3 minutes a question. Easy questions again.
But we might get a little audience.
Well, a little bit. Oh, yeah, we have the audience as well. When it comes to reining in big tech, very briefly, in your opinion, and you always ask these questions, what should the role of government be? Are you in favor of a more aggressive regulatory regime? Are the Europeans doing it right? Or are the Americans doing it right in the sense that they're mostly avoiding all these regulatory issues?
Well, there is no choice but for government to get much, much more deeply engaged with oversight of the technology sector, the global digital economy. Governments have been left behind too often. I think they are catching up. A number of people on the stage will say they see signs that we are catching up, what the EU has done, a California privacy law. There's definitely signs of progress, but it is amazing to me, and possibly the most disturbing thing I can think of, aside from global warming, that we have allowed the largest aggregation of humans in history for any purpose to emerge with no rules. I mean, Facebook has 2.67 billion people together. They can do whatever they want. Governments can do a little, point solution, regulation here and there, but basically they're deciding what's acceptable in speech, they're deciding what's acceptable in many ways in behavior. That is insane. It's idiotic. It doesn't make any sense, but it's easy to understand why it happened, because it was so rapid. I mean, I chronicled part of how rapid it was, and that was 9 years ago. But it's just fundamentally wrong that we have allowed that to happen. And it's not just an American phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon, and the globe somehow has to do something about that. Don't you agree?
Absolutely, but I'm interviewing you.
Oh, but you're an opinionated fellow.
I have very, very mild opinions. On democracy, David, again, you and I have talked about this. My new book focuses on the relationship between tech and democracy. What can technology, or what should technology do to help fix democracy? Or is the problem, the crisis of democracy, so bound up in technology that we should just put down our iPhones?
I think the question that's really worth asking, and it's worth asking of the leaders of especially some of the largest companies, is why don't they want to try to help fix democracy more actively? All they're trying to do is...
You mean your friends like Mark and Joe?
Among others, yes, because they're really operating more from a PR mindset, where they're trying to reduce their perception that they're bad. They have not stepped up with any kind of fundamental new technology to try to advance democracy, to try to help make things go better. And for example, tomorrow, when Catherine Maher of Wikimedia Foundation, who oversees Wikipedia, talks, this is what she's going to be saying. They have learned a lot of things at Wikipedia that could be applied in these other systems, but those leaders have chosen not to think in those terms because they've advanced the value, the morality, the ethic of growth and stock price appreciation and profit as a more prominent
But we can't blame
value.
it. It's always easy to blame everything on Wall Street.
It is, but look, we're in a unique situation.
But let's take the example.
I think it really is analogous to climate change in many ways, by the way.
Well, we're going to get to climate change, but let's briefly again finish talking about democracy. Isn't one of the problems with democracy that this technological revolution we've all lived through has been amazing in giving us a platform to express ourselves in video, in audio, in text. And we're all doing it, and we continue to do it. And what it hasn't done is taught us how to listen, and that's really the core crisis in democracy. Yeah. Can technology help us listen, or is that something which, again, is a human issue outside technology?
All I can say is it's the right question to be asking. We need to think hard about that. I mean, we need technology that gets us offline. And there are plenty of people thinking in those terms. Most of the harms that we can identify from technology would be far less severe right now if people would lift their eyes up from their phones a little more often and talk to the people around them. And how we can make that happen, I think, is something that we should talk about here, and we should all be talking about as much as we possibly can.
And I hope if Trump gets re-elected, you'll cancel next year's Techonomy, won't you? The end of the world, David, if he's re-elected. I mean, it's bad enough in the first place, but if he gets re-elected, especially through social media, which is, if he is re-elected, it will be through tech. He is the first true internet president, isn't he?
I don't think I want to say anything about it. I mean, I certainly, I think it's possible he could get re-elected. He's a master of digital media, sadly, in a way. It's not just Trump. I mean, I think Americans are so easily focused, and there are many non-Americans in the room, but it's so easy for Americans to get focused on what's happened here and to forget, and even in the connection with tech, you look at the Philippines.
Maria Ressa.
Well, yeah, Philippines,
Brazil,
Turkey, Hungary, Brexit, and Poland. There's tons of countries that are where political life is degrading in real time because dishonest people are expert at manipulating systems that don't have sufficient governance, and where the engineers who wrote them did not anticipate the harms that they could be used to cause. And that is a global problem, and it's going to get worse until the technologies change to some degree. And I do think regulation is the only near-term hope, but exactly how and where and by whom is a challenge.
And by the way, if you want to figure out how to fix democracy, I have a film coming out in February called How to Fix Democracy.
Do you want to show that short little clip?
No, we haven't got time. So finally, and this is I saved the really easy question until the end, David. I got my plastic water bottle to celebrate global warming. I was just in a debate in New York last week about capitalism, and someone asked a really good question about the problem with the global warming situation is it essentially caused by capitalism? I mean, sure, events like this will come up with all sorts of solutions, non-plastic water bottles, this and that. But is there a fundamental incompatibility between capitalism and saving the environment? Is the problem with our current environmental crisis that, and maybe it comes back to your Wall Street greed interests, is the problem essentially driven by the fact that we have the wrong economic system? At least from the point of view of the planet.
I hope not, because that system's not going anywhere. I think it's the right...
Although you will have people suggesting that it is going
It's the right question to ask. We've got to ask ourselves about that domain, what went wrong there, and how can we, with incredible speed, reposition ourselves for a radical set of interventions to remediate the harm that we're causing to our environment. And we're only beginning to have the urgency. And even though it's easy to make fun of Greta Thunberg, it's not hard to understand why she's so pissed off. And she's had an amazing influence as a result, and rightly so. I don't understand how we could get rid of capitalism. We're not going to get rid of capitalism soon enough, so it's not even worth really thinking about. We've got to work with the tools we've got. Capitalism is basically the tool we have to work with. Don't you think?
One question. I think we have time for one question from
Okay,
the
can we get
audience.
the little house lights up? Yeah, we're sort of
Someone-
moving quickly. Is there nobody wants to
So
say
you don't
anything?
believe, there is someone
Okay,
there.
there's somebody.
But
There's a
you
hand.
don't believe that...
Do we have mic? Anybody with mics
Let me
in
just...
the room?
So socialism, David, is a delusion, because there will be
No,
people
I'm not
here...
saying
who-
socialism is a delusion. I'm just saying the global economic system is overwhelmingly dominated by capitalism right now, even in China. And I just don't see that changing with anywhere near sufficient speed. I mean, if you really get into the details of climate, which we're
Elizabeth
going to talk
Warren-
about more on the stage this afternoon, it's already too late probably to keep the climate from going up 1.5 degrees over the baseline. We've got such an urgent emergency with climate that we can't think about change the economic system first. No, we got to act. We got to find moral and ethical and human basis for action that has nothing to do with economics.
Question about, but it's also possible this time next year that we will be welcoming a President Warren or a President Sanders who are indeed claiming at least to be reinventing the American economic system. But one question from this gentleman.
So,
Say who you are, please.
John Corrigan, CEO of a company called Summit Sync. So hate speech, fascism, nationalism, all of these terrible things political ads were around before Facebook. And Facebook has given the amplification to those people who believe in those things and the ability to advance their causes. Why is it that we have a society have said, hey, Mark Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sandberg, we need you to fix these things. You're the inventor of the technology, you're the author of this, you've provided the platform to do this. But why have we pointed to them to do that when it should be us who should be going to the core of those issues? And maybe there's some things that they can definitely do on their technology platform, but those issues are going to exist with or without them. So we need to figure those things out at their core, not just at the technology that distributes them in massive ways to society. How do you guys think about that in terms of making that a larger issue that we as a collective could solve?
Yeah, we got to wrap. But
That's
my only response to that is that...
It's a great question.
It's not a great question. It's a Silicon Valley question.
I'm sorry, I think it's a good
Go
question.
on, you...
I mean,
it's basically...
obviously they have to act, we have to act, society, governments have to act. I mean, unfortunately, we're all implicated.
Which means nothing's ever going to happen.
No, I don't think so at all. Look, Greta Thunberg's crying because she's so pissed off. Some people are taking urgent action, and many in this room are taking urgent action. So I'm not a pessimist, but basically we should be asking, why isn't everybody working harder to address these problems? And I think that's part of what we're here to talk about over these 2 days, but we do have to wrap. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.